Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Wednesday, August 29th day, 2018. I am your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey Youman. Chelsey, how are you?
I'm
First
good.
Liberty Institute.
Good afternoon.
So good to have you here. So good to have you here. And also, we've got Kerby Anderson, the one, the only. How are you, Kerby?
I'm doing very well. And Chelsey, we're going to lose you pretty soon, aren't we?
Pretty soon. Temporarily, I hope. But I'm about to be on maternity leave in a month.
Leave.
So
Yes.
exciting.
So enjoy your time with her today,
Okay.
right?
Okay, so
Be nice to her.
And the way
Don't
that I
debate
enjoy
her too much.
The way I enjoy my time with Chelsey is by disagreeing with what she has.
Adamantly.
Because I feel as though our listeners want to hear robust engagement. And so what I'll do is I'll just even take the devil's advocate position. I don't even have to
I don't know
believe
if
it.
I'm capable of taking a double advocate position. I'm just such a...
I always
You can
just
give it to me sometime,
Yeah,
just so
I
you're
always-
not always the bad guy.
It just always comes to mind what Montaigne said. Like, so there's nothing more boring than a conversation in which everyone agrees. And so I always just want to try to be that dissident voice for nevertheless. But nevertheless, we do have a great show for you all today. We've got quite a few things that are happening in the news. Everything from President Trump tweeting out kind of his displeasure of Google and potentially wanting to bring government regulation into this. Thankfully, we have Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute here to talk to us a little bit more about that. Polls continue to tighten between Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke, even to the extent that there was one poll released yesterday that showed that they were within the margin of error. And so we will be talking a little bit about that. Yesterday, 15 millennials ran for office in 3 different states. And how did they do? We'll analyze some of the results of yesterday. And then we'll also talk about, should the Pope stay or should the Pope go? Reports indicate that he has no plans to leave. But and Kerby's just for those of you that are watching on Facebook, you saw Kerby. There's an article that's out. Is that the Federalist, or is that
Is the Pope Catholic?
Is the Pope Catholic?
We're all wondering right now.
But nevertheless, we are going to be talking
so
about that and more, and we'll also be taking some of your phone calls. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And then if you're on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, you can leave a question or comment, and we will get back to that. What you share online, we'll share over the air if it's appropriate and we have time. But nevertheless, Chelsey, where should we start first? I feel as though we need to start with the Googles.
We can start with Google.
Google is just so prevalent. And so what's fascinating is President Trump got started early yesterday on Twitter, to say the very least, and started talking about some of the difficulties that conservatives have been voicing and frustrating relative to kind of the bias in technology in the Silicon Valley, but specifically he geared his attention towards Google and talking about how Google has a conservative bias. And there's the attempt, or at least the overtures that he was making through his tweet, is that he was going to regulate or entertain the idea of regulating. Kerby, hands up in the air. What are you thinking about this?
Well, again, this is something we've talked about before. It's a private company, but is it a public facility? And you've had more recently Senator Ted Cruz, or in light of some of the conversation we may be talking about later, the former Senator Ted Cruz, that has suggested that really the reason that they've been able to get away with this goes back to what is called the Communications Decency Act, which actually said that you could actually prevent these various social media organizations from various kinds of liability because they're, after all, a public forum. And the argument is, and we'll turn it to our lawyer in just a minute, is if you have a public square and then somebody says something defamatory, you can't sue the public square because they're just providing an open forum. But if indeed Facebook and Google and YouTube and all sorts of other groups are part of a digital cartel that are actually trying to manipulate the data, then maybe they are no longer exempt from some of that. Thus, maybe you won't get into the whether or not we could sue them, but you could regulate them. So that's kind of the argument being made right now by the senator who is in a very tight race here in the state of Texas. And I thought at least I would represent that point of view, and you can take the counterpoint of view if you'd like.
So, Chelsey, chime in a little bit. Because
I have a third point of view.
Oh, you have a third point of view. Well, why don't you share your third point of view second?
Okay, so my third point of view second is we got a couple legal dynamics that play I think would be helpful for everyone, all the listeners to hear about. So one would be that monopolies are not legal in our country. And so
antitrust,
part of, I think also, or maybe in addition to what Kerby is saying, is that if Google and some of these engines or social media platforms are truly monopolies, there's no competition out there. They're the holders and keepers of our information in our country. And that, that's a little disconcerting to me as someone who's very much like a freedom fighter. I do it for my career, truly believe in like freedom and democracy, freedom of information and conversation and debate. All of those are, I think, really high standards for democracies to function. Well, if you have one person at the top controlling that information, that is disconcerting. And so from a regulatory standpoint, it can be regulated if Congress, the right avenue and the right branch of government, decides it is a public forum, or if the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and Congress decide that there's some monopoly laws that have been violated here, and they want to diversify the playing field and make sure that well-rounded voices and control mechanisms are in place. My major argument, though, is that, yes, this can be regulated, but that is not the job for the president. When the executive branch gets involved, this starts to look to me like creepy censorship. I'm just going to call it what it is. So I don't want my president or my governor or anyone in the executive branch starting to say who are the winners and losers when it comes to free speech. Viewpoint discrimination claims, I think, would definitely arise on Google's behalf. And as someone who litigates in the free speech realm, I really think that the executive should not touch this with a 10-foot pole. We already have mechanisms in place. We've got the FTC. If they want to open an investigation for monopoly issues, they can do that. And again, then our legislature would be the appropriate mechanism to really vet these issues and start regulating if they want to. I doubt it happens, but that's appropriate.
And so this all stems from a tweet at 5:24 in the morning where President Trump said, quote, Google search results for Trump news shows only viewing reporting of fake news media. In other words, they have it rigged for me and others so that almost all stories and news is bad. Fake CNN is prominent. And what's fascinating is that there's an individual, Eric Erickson, who is out of Georgia, conservative commentator of the research. Phenomenal. Just really has a keen insight into this and talks about how there's more at play than simply just kind of the tilting, one might say, of the public square relative to bias. And so what he was arguing is that at the end of the day, it's really a donor issue. So you have left-leaning sites and then right-leaning sites. Obviously, they're gearing towards particular donors. And he says the mentality among left-leaning donors is that they're not looking for a profit. What they say is the end goal of a left-leaning donor would be the sense that they want in exchange for their funds to go towards these websites, they want to see policies that are changed. But where right-leaning sites typically get funds and donors is they're looking for the 501c3. And usually when these nonprofit organizations are very tight with their budgets, and so they're willing to skimp on some of the customization as well as making it a little bit higher search engine optimization in order that Google might be able to play a little bit better with conservative sites. So it's just very fascinating. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get back from the break. But when we get back, we're going to talk some more about the Google situation. And then, as Kerby alluded to earlier, we're going to talk a little bit about the race that it continues to grow tighter and tighter with each day between Senator Ted Cruz and Representative Beto O'Rourke. But we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Many people in our world accept certain lies uncritically. That is the argument in one of the chapters in the book Deceivers. Dr. Gary Frazier was on the Point of View radio program recently to talk about his chapter dealing with Laodicean lies. The church in Laodicea is mentioned in the 3rd chapter of the book of Revelation. It was a church that was lukewarm, neither hot nor cold. In many ways, this describes our 21st century world. The first Laodicean lie is the belief that you don't need God. The message of Laodicea was that God was irrelevant. He explains that it is the deception to think that the church can possibly operate in the flesh as opposed to the Spirit of God. The second Laodicean lie is the promotion of unconditional love and acceptance. Certainly we should love sinners, but we compromise the Bible and the gospel message when we promote tolerance at every sin and perverted lifestyle. He says that a large number of people who claim to be Christian have fallen prey to the idea that love equates with acceptance of anything and everything. The third Laodicean lie is political correctness. He quotes a syllogism by Dr. Al Mohler about how truth died. When that which was once celebrated is condemned, when that which was once condemned is now celebrated, and when those who refuse to celebrate are condemned. Truth is condemned, lies are celebrated, and those who refuse are condemned. Gary Frazier says that he does not care about being politically correct. Instead, he cares about truth. In a time when the values of our culture are inverted from biblical principles, we need to come back to Paul's teaching in the book of Romans. He wrote, "Let God be true and every human being a liar." I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey, Youman, and Kerby Anderson. And we've been talking a little bit about Google, specifically with President Trump's tweet early on Tuesday morning at 5:24 in the morning. He said, quote, "Google searches results for Trump news shows only viewing reporting of fake news media. In other words, they've rigged it for me and others so that almost all stories and news is bad. Fake CNN is prominent." And kind of the reaction is that Google is the one that's doing this. But what Eric Erickson is contending, especially on his site, the Maven, and I'll tweet out that article, is the sense that it really is, there's more at play that's going on in the background. So specifically, it really is about a donor class kind of deal. And so it moves it more into the technological world, where it's saying that traditionally left-leaning websites typically have they play a little bit better with Google just because they're spending a little bit more, and that goes back to the donors, that they're not necessarily looking for a profit or return based on their 501c3 status, which is typically the route that right-wing Republicans are going to go with their search engines, or with their websites. But left-leaning organizations are more going to just give to these organizations and these news websites and opinion op-ed places. And really, the kind of the payback they'll get is in policy. It's less about winning a particular war and more about just policy advancement. And so what Eric Erickson is arguing is that this really isn't a Google thing. This is more of just a donor thing, which I think is pretty interesting, especially when you consider certain things like Prager University, which is, again, a nonprofit that's experienced a little bit of censorship relative to Facebook in particular.
And YouTube especially.
And so it's a donor mentality that's making its way into this.
I have a question.
Okay.
So are you saying that the liberal websites tend to spend more on what we'll say SEOs, search engine optimization?
I mean,
they're spending more on that, so that's why they're getting better results?
Yeah, and so I mean, even just a cursory glance. So I write an email every morning called the Daily Briefing. Daily Briefing just gives an overview of the news. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm just availing myself every morning of about 35 websites every day. And that's left and right, because I don't want to just at the end of the day, the goal is not to be right or left. The goal is to be biblical with the Daily Briefing. And what I found, at least through cursory instances, is usually left-wing websites are a little bit more technologically advanced. They're much easier. So they're willing to spend some of that money. And what they're finding especially with right-wing websites is, again, there's limited funds than there is on the left, much more limited funds. And so they're coming up and they're utilizing these prepackaged websites. So like the Squarespace, the WordPress, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, this might just be something that I'm, living too much by what I've seen, but I would argue, as a great example, First Liberty Institute has an amazing website. Go to firstliberty.org. Okay. You might have to go to the third page of Google to find it because it's been buried. But no, and they've utilized tons of technology and had consultants come in and look at our pages and just completely try to optimize SEOs. And I can put in the name of each of our clients has a client page, and you can read about each of their cases. I can put in the name of my client and then words First Liberty Institute, and I will have to scroll sometimes a page to go find our website. And so I would argue with the technology we're trying to use, we are trying to be very advanced so that we can get people learning about our issues and educate on our issues. Maybe that's just a personal example, but I just don't know that I'm buying it. I don't know that I'm buying what you're selling.
So so let me continue to make the pitch then. So I would say that we're seeing it right now within the elections, right? So you go in and you, within Election 101, when you're buying advertising dollars, you're not simply just wanting to identify, we'll go with the Texas Senate race, for example, because that's applicable to our listeners right now, at least our listeners that are listening here in the Dallas area. So when you go in and you're not just simply wanting to buy, if I'm going to be a Ted Cruz guy, I'm not just wanting to buy anything related to Ted Cruz. So relative to search engine optimization, Ted, Cruz, liberty, freedom, physical responsibility. I'm probably also wanting to buy Beto, O'Rourke, Democrat Texas, because I'm not only trying to solidify the base, I'm also trying to expand the base.
Right.
And so what Eric is arguing in this, to go back to the Maven article, or the Resurgent article rather, is the sense that they're willing to spend more dollars. Left-leaning donors are willing to spend more dollars, and in turn they're buying more in order that they might be able to capture more of the search results, which I think is very compelling, especially when you look at even just the pictures that so often that Eric alluded to at the beginning of his article. He says that you typed in idiot, and there came up pictures of President Trump most often within the Google search. Well, I would say, I would argue just another left-wing tactic in order to be able to do those common word associations. That's gone all the way back to President Bush, right? That they've tried to continue to try to paint that, and at the end of the day, you want to define yourself before you get defined by your opponent, and they're just doing a very, very good job of that. But one of the fascinating things that we saw in 2016 is that we won.
Let me add one more thing, and that is maybe now this is a radio program we need to do in the future, because over the years we've had a chance to talk to some people that have done some pretty specific and specified media bias. I'm thinking of Professor Gross-Close in UCLA. His book is probably one of the better ones. I was just looking right now to see how CNN is reacting to some of that, and they've got one by Chris Salissa that says, well, I tried to use the chart that Cheryl Atkinson uses, and that one doesn't seem to work very well, and so maybe it's a time to go and maybe, instead of just having the anecdotes, because all of us have had those, trying to find my own articles trying to find First Liberty articles can be a real challenge sometimes. Now, is there a problem with the way the website is or the keywords? Maybe. Or is there a bias? I'd like to have somebody who's got some technical, analytical skills to evaluate that, rather than something sent by the president at 5:42 in the morning or something like that. Don't you think that's what we need if we're going to really talk about whether or not there's a problem? And that, again, back to Chelsey's comment, is something either Congress needs to deal with, or the FTC or the FCC, not the President of the United States.
But I mean, if I look at it from a holistic standpoint, and so I'll just continue to double down on this, is the reality that Republicans have known for years that they've had a communication issue, right? Like this isn't a new
all the way back to wanting to buy CBS. Remember that in the old days? Yeah, they wanted to buy CBS.
This isn't a new argument, a new problem that we've had. I mean, Republicans have always had a communication issue when it comes to conveying their ideas and beliefs in a way that's palatable as well as relevant to the constituency. But yet, the idea is typically, like we're experiencing right now, people continue to want to rail against President Trump, and there are certain instances where they can rail against him because of some of the things that he said. But at the end of the day, things are pretty good right now. Like consumer confidence is now at a new high that it hasn't been since 2006. Right now, the job market is white hot right now. You've got Supreme Court justices that are, I think the latest count, the Senate is 60 not Supreme Court justices rather, but 60 court judges have been judicial nominations have been confirmed. Right. Relative to the ISIS situation, things are much better, and they're moving into schooling now and moving away from it. So you can argue that the results, our communication has been atrocious, but the results have kind of yielded a pretty good product right now.
Yep.
Right. I'm never going to just pick on an entire team. Well, I will if it's the Democrats sometimes. But I wouldn't say that Republicans are all just across the board atrocious at communicating. Oh, yeah. I actually think Trump, now this is an anomaly from a political science standpoint, but Trump won the communication card by eliminating third-party conduits. So he eliminated the need for liberal media outlets to cover him and cover him well. He eliminated the need to get his message out that way, and he speaks directly to the public. And I've heard that that's part of the political theory that's developing, is that his ability to speak directly to Americans, for better or worse, with the right rhetoric or not, we can talk about. We've talked about that before. But at the end of the day, that he got his message out. He defined his own campaign, his own platforms. He defined who he was going to be about directly to the public via Twitter and via direct paths and means. So that's part of the theory of why he won. He actually, he might not be a great communicator by certain standards, but by other standards, he won on a communication platform in a new way. Yeah,
Ronald Reagan had his note cards in his desk, and President Trump has his smartphone in his hand, which might not always be the best thing. Right. But Kerby, I mean, we've only got a minute left, but you know what I just find fascinating is now President Trump has kind of moved the press being the enemy. But even if we remember the campaign, the press was enamored with then candidate Trump. The idea of a reality TV star actually running and potentially winning the press. It's so because that's what many people made. Like he was literally getting millions upon millions of dollars of free ad campaign.
Now he's complaining about it.
but nevertheless, it's just such a fascinating dynamic.
It is fascinating,
It's so fascinating. So nevertheless, we've got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, we're going to continue talking a little bit more about the media. But we'll also be talking about the race that continues to tighten here in the state of Texas between Senator Ted Cruz and his reelection campaign against Representative Beto O'Rourke of El Paso, and how the latest poll indicates that they have now moved within the margin of error. And so is this a cause for alarm for individuals that are supporting Senator Cruz, candidate Ben Cruz, or is this just another thing? And now I'm getting glares from Chelsey. I'm sorry, but nevertheless, we've got to take a break, and we'll be back right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. On this Wednesday, August 29th day, we have been talking a little bit about Google, but we're going to transition over to the race that many people are talking about around the country right now between Ted Cruz up for his re-election campaign and getting the glares from Chelsey.
Wait, I'm not even glaring yet.
She's very intimidating right now, y'all. You can
sorry.
tell. Sorry,
not sorry.
There it is. Sorry, not sorry. Between Ted Cruz and then Representative Beto O'Rourke, and this is been a campaign that's been chronicled nationally, and kind of it's very interesting because now a latest poll that was released just yesterday indicated that Ted Cruz now is only up by 1 point within the 4-point margin of error right now, and so it's causing many individuals to continue to shift their heads and turn, and to the extent that we're continuing to hear new reports out of the Hill are indicating that national GOP as well as traditional Republican donors are now going to start flooding our airwaves with campaign material. And even just a couple of days ago, Ted Cruz released a new campaign ad that kind of went against the viral response that Beto O'Rourke gave relative to disrespect and kneeling before the flag. And so, Chelsey, what are we to make of this right now? I know we continue to talk about this week in and week out, and I know you're just so confident right now.
It's not that I'm confident. It's not that. It's that I believe that Texas is predominantly Republican, and I have seen this play turn Texas blue my entire life. Time after time again, Wendy Davis back in 2013, the left, they do the same thing every time. They raise Hollywood dollars that aren't from our state, so that's not indicative. Like, donor dollars are not indicative of support in our state because his donor dollars are coming from Ellen DeGeneres, right? The left has Hollywood commenting on it, and media sources like the Washington Examiner has now done a poll. There's just tons. Was it Newsweek is the article we're looking at now? So yeah. National liberal media is, of course, wants Texas to go blue. They talk about it all the time. And the polling data doesn't stress me out. We all know after the last election that polling data can be really, especially in the state of Texas, a lot of the polls, the people and individuals being polled, they're subsets of the population. Okay. So they're not indicative of the real voting population. Lots of times they might have like a lot of strong, solid millennials involved. So I don't think they're indicative of really what's going on in our state. I think, though, Republicans should still show up. Okay. So I don't want that to dissuade Republicans and make them all feel safe. Republicans need to show up. And if they do, Cruz can carry Denton, Collin, and Tarrant County. And there are enough Republicans in those three counties alone to outweigh Travis County and San Antonio, Bexar County. And then, of course, Houston, Harris County is going to be a mixed bag. So I think that there are plenty of Republicans. We just need to show up and not be too dissuaded by, of course, the left's rhetoric that Texas is somehow going blue.
So, Kerby, I think you brought up a really interesting point, because if you look at this latest poll, one of the interesting things, not only it showed that Cruz's lead was getting a little bit more slim, but it also showed a significant increase in the number of individuals that are undecided. Right now.
And again, that poll, people can find it on our website, 21%. Now, let me tell you a couple things that you need to know if you haven't looked at polls. Number one, some people are undecided until Labor Day. Spoiler alert, Labor Day is Monday. So, if there is still a 20% or more undecided after Labor Day, I'll give you the conclusion. They ain't voting. They're not voting. But if they are undecided after that point in time, it's not helpful for Ted Cruz, because think about this. You've been a senator for 6 years and people still haven't made up your mind about you. That means either they're not voting, or if some of those individuals are convinced to vote, they will vote for your opponent. And this is one of the concerns that I'm sure the Cruz campaign is looking at. I'll get a chance to be with him on Monday at this Labor Day rally, and I know they're looking at this, and that is the fact that when you are a sitting senator and you don't have an approval rating close to 50%, there's always the possibility that somebody votes for your opponent, even if they don't know much about him. And when there's that much motivation, this is why, as Chelsey points out, turnout is going to be crucial. But it isn't just the Republicans getting turned turnout. Yesterday, we did a program in the first hour where we talked about some of these very sophisticated devices that have been developed by, interesting enough, the Texas governor, which is being used also by some other individuals to identify those individuals who routinely don't vote in a midterm election, to spend time knocking on their door and then calling them. And they even put devices and apps on these phones so that they can get those people out. Well, in some respects, Republicans have been late to the game. Democrats have been doing this very effectively for almost a decade, and they're also looking at those undecided 21%. If you can convince some of those to vote for Representative O'Rourke, it becomes Senator O'Rourke very easily.
I think what's going to be really interesting, and Kerby, you bring up great points, is there was a GQ article that chronicled both of them. And what I was so shocked by is the sense that there was just so much attention, and there's just so much, I would almost argue like a kind of just a whip of emotion that's within the O'Rourke campaign. I mean, he played guitar, was it bass guitar with Willie Nelson? He's going on Ellen. He literally has these morning runs with his supporters where they stop occasionally and ask questions. I mean, he's just everywhere with he's traveled to all I think 254 Texas counties. Yeah. And so he's just getting his race.
That's what happens when you're not doing the job. You've got all the time in the world. Meanwhile, Cruz is over in D.C.
doing the people's work and not out there on the campaign trail. And that's a help that O'Rourke has as well, because they're taking a break right now. Well, and Mitch McConnell's kept the senators in session.
Well, I have to be true to myself, even though you know which way I'm going to vote because I revealed that in the past two segments. But I will say that Senator Cruz was not there last week. He wasn't there last week when there were at the legislative or at this Judiciary Committee hearing. He wasn't there. Senator Flake wasn't there either. Senator Flake was over in Africa right now. So we can't use it to be intellectually honest.
That's true.
To be intellectually honest.
Okay, so last week
Ted Cruz was just right down the road to Carrollton the other day.
I know that. Week, so I think there's that.
No doubt O'Rourke is running a campaign.
Oh, yeah,
I mean, he is hanging around because he has to. He's got a lot more work to do. Incumbents win statistically 90% of the time.
Yeah.
Okay, so statistically, O'Rourke is out. Based on typical theory, but he's got to generate name recognition. It's just why you see so many signs. Everyone puts a lot of stock in the signs. I actually don't, because they actually have a very small return for bang for your buck when it comes to voter turnout. But he's got more work to do, more ground to cover. He has to become a household name if he's going to be. But you forget we're a straight ticket state. So what's going to happen is, hopefully the Republicans show up, and when they do, they just vote straight ticket. I just don't see this going the other way. I just don't.
First of all, it was interesting. I just heard from James Dickey the other day, head of the Republican Party. He said Democrats last time were more likely to vote straight ticket than Republicans. So that's something. But I want to get from both of you, with the debate that was supposed to happen on Friday, the debates that will happen, does that help? And I want to hear from both of you. Does that help Ted Cruz because he's a good debater, or does it help Representative O'Rourke because a lot of people don't know who he is? What about if they end up doing these debates? Who does it help?
I think it's very clear that Ted Cruz is a very able debater, right? Like now here's the thing though. Is the goal to be able to persuade an audience or to entertain an audience? Because now I would submit that the debates now are less informative and they're more entertaining in value, and that's where you see the personality of Beto O'Rourke on full display. In that he is, again, his video went viral. He didn't put any money into it. He just was responding at a Q&A town hall, and it's whipped up. Last I saw, over 5 million people are watching this video.
So likability is a huge factor when it comes to campaigns.
Yes,
and I think,
huge factor.
That we've seen Cruz before in presidential debates, and he is smarter probably than 99% of the room he's ever in.
He's forgotten.
He's
more
a Harvard.
Than I know.
Right. He's an intellectual. I mean, there's no one in our country who saw him debate could question his intellectual ability. It's one of the reasons I really like him as a senator. But I don't know when it comes to the likability factor or, the relatability factor in our state that he becomes more relatable after debates. He's just so brilliant that he kind of stands out that way. But O'Rourke definitely has a likability factor, and that's obvious. And I won't deny that.
But as what we find out, especially here in the millennial, with the millennial generation, it really is. There's the likability component one, but there's also the ability to drop the mic or to have a good sticking point or to be able just to lay something down or something along those lines, so that individuals in the campaigns can clip it and make it a YouTube clip, and then eventually they can put like, O'Rourke gets destroyed by or obliterated or smashed.
Well, but even if you think about the presidential debates, for as smart as Cruz was and as well executed and prepared as those debates were for him, I don't know that it increased his rankings. I don't know that it helped him. So I do agree with you guys on that front, that a debate it'd be a toss up as to who would come out ahead on that.
And so we'd love to hear from you. What do you think? What do you think about the Senate race right now that's happening in Texas? You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can leave a note at facebook.com/pointofviewradio in the live video box right underneath there's comment section. You leave a comment or question, and what you share online, we'll try to share over air. And we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. If I were to tell you about worshipers describing themselves as underground, what comes to mind? Oppressive regimes and brutal dictators, maybe? Nazi Germany or first century Rome? Actually, that comes from our clients, Orthodox Jewish residents in Airmont, New York. And sadly, this is nothing new. The United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit explained in the 1995 case of LeBlanc Stenberg versus Fletcher that Airmont had been incorporated for the purpose of excluding Jewish citizens using zoning restrictions designed to prevent Jewish adherents from gathering for prayer within city limits. Going on 3 decades later, and at least 2 Department of Justice-led lawsuits, and the city of Airmont is still wielding its zoning laws to discriminate. Attorneys with First Liberty were in Airmont not long ago defending a local rabbi. He had spent over 2.5 years and about $20,000 in application costs trying to gain the approval to use his home for prayer meetings. Instead, the city rewarded him with a citation, carrying a penalty of up to $1,000 and a year in jail for the unlawful use of his home for prayer meetings. We managed to get those charges dropped, at least temporarily. No one should feel like they have to pray underground, hiding from the government or fearing punishment for what is supposed to be the free exercise of religion. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View. your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I think the mic was on there for a little bit. I had one of those hot mic moments, but nevertheless.
That's okay. What we say off air is just as good as on air sometimes.
That's what I feel good about that. And so we've been talking a little bit more about the Ted Cruz debate. And Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke, they're scheduled for a series of 5 debates on they're competing against this little thing called high school football here in Texas. And I don't know if
everyone on Friday, I'm going to a high school football game Friday. I'm not sure I would have watched the debate, but it's not on anyway.
I'm a loser because I would have watched it. I was so sad.
I love it. And so there's
you can always tape it and watch it later.
There's a series of 5 debates that are scheduled to be able to happen over the next 5 Fridays. And Beto O'Rourke now his campaign has gone ahead and said, according to the Texas Tribune, that they're going to pull. That they're more than likely it's this Friday night's debate is not going to happen.
I thought all 5 though were pulled.
Are all 5 pulled?
I don't know. That's how I read it, was that he's not committing now to the debate.
Then
who knows?
Because you just wonder, like, what do you win, right? What does each campaign win by doing the debate? Like, what's the plus minus? What are you risking right now? And I think with Beto O'Rourke, I mean, what's happened is that he doesn't need the debates to be able to raise the profile, right? Like he's going on Ellen. He's touring with Willie Nelson to a certain degree. And I mean, if we want to relate it to what happened in Florida, for example, Ron DeSantis, or whatever his name is, went ahead and won the GOP primary for the Florida governor race yesterday. And what he did is he just went on Fox News. He did over 100 Fox News hits while he was campaigning, and just the sheer amount of media exposure that he was able to get simply by just commenting as a congressman really not only set him over and above, but set him over and above a pretty solid candidate in Adam Putnam, who had the name recognition, who had groomed himself, had been a representative, then had served in statewide office, I think as agriculture commissioner in Florida. And DeSantis was able to beat Putnam. Now, that's also because he had this little, an individual named President Trump. Endorsement.
Which helped him. Yeah. Some places might hurt him.
But then again, I mean, has Ted Cruz been endorsed by President Trump?
I don't think so.
Oh, that would be interesting to know.
I've been looking. I haven't seen it. If it's out there, I just missed it.
And so it's just really interesting. And so so Chelsey, I've got a great question for you. Okay, so obviously, I think we can all agree that this race, 1, is closer than what many expected. I think that's fair.
Yes.
2, that Senator Cruz is running a less than desirable campaign. There's room for improvement, just like there's room for improvement in any of our lives as well as any campaign.
Well, election day isn't here yet, so I don't know that I'll fully concede that.
No. So this is where my question.
He's working hard for the money, people.
Yeah, so this is where my question comes. Okay, so you've got now into election day. What are some of the suggestions, if the Cruz campaign is listening right now, that you would be saying that they need to be implementing onto the campaign trail in order to be able to see Senator Cruz reelected?
Well, that's a loaded question. Do you have some suggestions while I think about it?
Kerby?
I think that what they need to do right now is go through and identify individuals who in the past have voted as a Republican in the presidential election, but have shown a tendency not to vote in the midterm, and turn those individuals out. Now, you might say, well, how in the world do they do that? As we talked about yesterday on this hour, Governor Abbott has identified 600,000 households in the state of Texas, okay, that are indeed those where we have that kind of specificity. And if I'm one of the field representatives for Ted Cruz, I'm going to those individuals. You can assume that your base, the people that voted for you 6 years ago, will probably vote for you again. What you need is to make sure you don't erode that base, but more importantly, you find some of those individuals that maybe 6 years ago weren't here. They moved here from California, New York, or they aren't necessarily midterm voters. This time would be a great opportunity to turn them into midterm voters.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's one of the things that I think is really important. You kind of alluded to it in a previous comment, and I'm going to circle back to it, is the idea that technology has allowed us to be able to have a significant amount of information so that when you're a door-to-door volunteer knocking door-to-door, you know more than just simply what kind of flowers are in the front yard. I mean,
It's amazing.
I won't name the organization, but there's an organization that has the capacity to have 200 data points on you when they walk up to you. So not only do they know you, but they know how you respond.
I can show you what's on the phone here. If I go to Chelsey's household, I can tell you what her husband's name is, what her name is, when they voted, and any other information that has come from other people that when they've knocked on that door have entered it in.
Yep.
And then after they've talked to her and her husband, whoever happens to be there, add that as they're walking to the next house. That's how sophisticated some of this technology is, and that's on our phones.
And you're
when
able
we
to,
walk
and they're
those
also
precincts.
able to plug in third-party data. So, like like are you buying your groceries online?
Yes.
Are you? What kind of books are you? Because all this is.
Are you
this is
subscribing
available
to Christianity Today?
Exactly.
They've got that kind of data.
They've got that data,
like
so they know exactly not only how they need to respond, but who they need to be in front of you in order to get you to respond in a favorable manner.
Isn't that amazing?
And so and I know the Cruz campaign. I would assume both campaigns, especially now since there's just so much interested in this from the party level. You've got to mobilize some of those individuals to get them out, because at the end of the day, Texas is red. I mean, there's no doubting that Texas is still a red state. But you've just got to make sure that individuals aren't apathetically just assuming that it'll always be a red state, right?
I think we found ground we all agree with. Kirby's answer is just so brilliant and so true. And that, I don't know that Ted Cruz needs to waste his time, with yard signs and doing all these media. And I mean, he's a household name in our state. He's represented our state for many years and done so very well. I mean, he's a constitutional conservative. We all know what Senator Cruz is about and what his platforms are. And so I think you're right. It is going to just come down to making sure all those Republicans show up.
Yeah. And so, go ahead.
Just one more thing I want to put on the table. I've given you some numbers, and you don't want to hear any more except this one. 280,000 people in this state who are illegally here who are registered to vote.
Wow.
280,000 illegal aliens registered to vote. Now, how do we know this? Well, we've had Senator Don Huffines here, and just in the state, well, actually, just in the city of Dallas, in the state of Texas, he's been able to identify that. And the people that have run the numbers think that there may be as many as 280,000 people that are illegal aliens who are registered to vote. I think most of those, not all of them vote. That's the good news in the sense, but they do. And the way we find some of them, interestingly enough, in Dallas, that's how Don Huffines was telling us, is that when they are selected for jury duty, they can mark why they aren't going to serve on jury duty, and they'll mark, I'm not a citizen. And then they'll go back and go, yeah, but you were registered to vote. And so they self-identify. And so
I'd like to volunteer for jury duty. I personally love that.
So anyway, it's just one more thing. If those individuals could be convinced to vote, how do you think they're going to vote?
Well, don't forget that a lot, I mean, it's from a demographic standpoint, highly Catholic population, and Ted Cruz is after all Hispanic. Believe it or not, Beto O'Rourke is not actually. It's Richard O'Rourke, and he's not. So I do think that Cruz's story and life and his parents' life, it's extraordinary. I mean, it is the American dream. And I think it's every immigrant's dream. And so I actually think that there's a lot of relatability there. And from a faith standpoint, a pro-life standpoint, with a heavy Catholic population, I don't know that hurts us.
Yeah.
But I'm an optimist. We all know this. So just write off everything.
You are quite the optimist. And I'll just continue to say again and again, the results speak for themselves. And that the Senate has been able to churn out and do some great work relative to
Unbelievable.
More
than anybody would have ever
confirmations. The economy is white hot right now and booming, especially here in the DFW. I mean, we are literally at a time right now that we haven't been in almost 2 decades, where there are more job openings than individuals that are looking for jobs right now. And then you look overseas as well, as I know that the North Korean situation is still very tenuous, but ISIS is not something that's nearly the pressing threat that it used to be. The results speak for themselves. We might not like the person, but at the end of the day, if the person can get out of the way and just continue to do what they do, I mean, it's just very advantageous. But nevertheless, we're going to have to take a break. But when we come back from the break, we'll continue talking about this Texas Senate race, but we'll also talk a little bit more about the Catholic controversy that's happening. We'll be back right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you've been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Wednesday, August 29th day of 2018. I am your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable here for hour two with the one, the only, Chelsey Youman. How are you, Chelsey?
I'm good. I'm good.
So
There's
good.
really two of me here,
I know.
actually.
I feel good about that. Well, I guess technically in the sense, isn't like a child called like a half? Isn't it? Or is that a baby?
Yeah, I'm
okay.
1.5 right
okay,
now.
1.5. I feel really good about that. So that means she holds greater weight when it comes to some of the debating points that
And
we'll
really,
have.
literally, too.
Oh, wait, look at these guns. I know our audience can't see over the radio, and this is totally a tangent, but I've got a 15-inch neck. I'm a force to be reckoned with in the weight room. And we're also joined. Kerby Anderson. Kerby, how are you?
I'm doing well. Good to have you sitting in that chair here.
So, he
Lead us
says
on.
that now after I just told the national audience about my neck size. But nevertheless, we've been having a good time.
Our hat size, yeah.
We've been having a good time. Earlier in the first hour, we were talking a little bit about the Google debacle that's happened because of President Trump's tweet at 5 o'clock in the morning yesterday about whether the government should bring in regulations and censorship relative to Google, and the conservative kind of tilt against conservatives, I should say. And we're talking a little bit more about kind of some of the background on that to help individuals and help you all get a better understanding. And then we transitioned to start talking about the Beto O'Rourke and Senator Ted Cruz, Representative Beto O'Rourke race that's happening here in Texas as it continues to kind of tighten up a little bit. We were talking a little bit about the intricacies of that campaign, offered up some suggestions to both campaigns about how they might be able to move forward. And so we're going to be talking a little bit more about those issues as well as a couple of others. Specifically, yesterday in Florida, for example, there was quite a race that happened that gave us maybe a tide of things to come, a sign of things to come, rather, relative to the GOP races, the GOP primary as well as the Democratic primary out of the Florida governor's race, as well as we'll be talking a little bit about the tragedy that continues to unfold within the Catholic Church right now relative to Pope Francis, and then just the allegations that continue to it just seems like day after day after day we'll be talking. More comes out about what did the Vatican know, what did they not know, what was perpetuated, what wasn't. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. Specifically, I think Ross Douthout has a phenomenal piece in the New York Times where he being Catholic and also one of the conservative opinion writers for the New York Times, we'll be discussing that a little bit more. But I want to go ahead and jump into the race that happened yesterday, specifically some of the elections that happened yesterday. And I want to give attention to what seems to be what's going to be a nationalized race, but specifically located in the swing state of Florida. And so in a shocking twist yesterday, an individual named Andrew Gillum, who was the mayor of Tallahassee, ended up winning the Democratic nomination for the governor's race, which will square him off against DeSantis on the Republican side. And what's fascinating is that these are two individuals that very much have catered, I would argue that have catered to kind of some of the big personalities is what I'll call it. So you see DeSantis has very much catered to the Republican leader, which is President Trump, to the extent that he put out an ad on YouTube that I thought was so fascinating, Kerby, that literally was him building a wall of Legos with his child.
It was well done. Very well done.
So,
Very creative.
I mean, this guy is not associated with Trump. I don't know how.
And spent a lot of time on Fox Fox News.
It's been over 100 hits.
Yes.
3-minute little interview hits with Fox News. And then you've got Andrew Gillum, who had the support, even though he supported Hillary Clinton during the 2016 primary, had the support of Bernie Sanders and was able to win out in the Democratic primary. And Kerby, it seems as though this Florida governor's race, even though they're just trying to lead the state of Florida, it seems as though it's being nationalized to a large degree, which is just in a shocking
every race
twist
right now.
I was just about to say, in a shocking twist is not too common, but it's definitely highlighted and epitomized.
I would think so. First of all, let me just say something in passing. I'd love to hear from our Florida listeners. Maybe they, of course, just voted and have some thoughts about that. If you had asked me even just a couple of weeks ago, Nick, who would win, I'd say Gwen Graham. Why would I say that? Well, first of all, former member of Congress, related to Graham himself, of course, who was the senator and everything. I mean, and very well known. And so, first of all, you've got this 39-year-old mayor from Tallahassee. So, again, a millennial wins. There's that. But with a progressive agenda. And so far, what I'm seeing is that he supports Medicare for all. So that's single payer. He supports a $15 an hour minimum wage, which, again, is one of those progressive ideas. He's opposed to the stand your ground self-defense law. That, of course, goes back to that shooting that happened when Marcus McLaughlin was shot there in Clearwater, and is, of course, endorsed, as you might imagine, by Senator Bernie Sanders. So on the one hand, you've got a Ron DeSantis, who is, one of the favorites of Fox News, a favorite of Donald Trump, pro Second Amendment, pro free enterprise Republican. And then you've got what essentially is a progressive mayor who in many ways holds to the same kind of stands as our Democratic Socialist. This will be a national race, and if indeed Gilliam wins, that's going to mean that maybe a lot of things have shifted, not just in the Democratic Party, but in America at large. So we'll see where it goes.
And Chelsey, I mean, Florida's always got significant attention, especially during presidential years, but even more so, what we saw, what I would consider encouraging, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, is just the sheer voter turnout. It was upwards of 30 to 40% higher than I saw numbers of like 1.7 million people that were voting in the Democratic primary and 1.8 or 1.9 in the Republican primary. It was shocking how many people had come out to vote.
Right. I think that's a really great statistic, and I hope that it's nationwide. I think these midterms, maybe more than in my recent memory at least, have become a bigger and bigger deal than any other midterm. And I think people are looking at as a statement on, for better or worse, on our president and how he's doing. And people are making it a lot about the presidency. And for that reason, I think Republicans who are very happy and want to gain ground and know what's at stake, if you're paying attention, losing Senate seats and House seats, losing the majority is really going to change the next few years of the remainder of Trump's administration. I think people know how high the stakes are. And so I'm encouraged by the voter turnout. I hope that it's that way nationwide. I was surprised to see just how progressive and how far left Gillum was, because we didn't mention this on the list, but he's also pro-Trump impeachment, which is maybe all Democrats will be at some point. Yeah. But he's definitely, when we're talking about the left becoming more siloed and turning towards more socialistic platforms, he represents that. And so I was a little surprised to see him win. And he raised less money than his opponent. And so he didn't spend the same amount of money. He didn't raise the same amount of donor dollars. So he's breaking some rules in a lot of the regard, not pandering necessarily to a median voter, that's for sure.
And in an ironic twist, is also potentially breaking some rules because he's at the center of an FBI investigation.
Yeah, and the city council and everything. I was going to bring that up, but I didn't know if you wanted to. So, yes.
And I just
he had to shake that one off.
Yeah, so that investigation's ongoing. We're going to talk a little bit more about this, but we would love to hear your comments and your calls. And so what do you think about the Florida race? What are your feelings towards the midterm elections? We'll be taking some of your phone calls. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can jump over on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And hi, Hunza.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Many people in our world accept certain lies uncritically. That is the argument in one of the chapters in the book Deceivers. Dr. Gary Fraser was on the Point of View radio program recently to talk about his chapter dealing with Laodicean lies. The church in Laodicea is mentioned in the 3rd chapter of the book of Revelation. It was a church that was lukewarm, neither hot nor cold. In many ways, this describes our 21st century world. The first Laodicean lie is the belief that you don't need God. The message of Laodicea was that God was irrelevant. He explains that it is the deception to think that the church can possibly operate in the flesh as opposed to the Spirit of God. The second Laodicean lie is the promotion of unconditional love and acceptance. Certainly we should love sinners, but we compromise the Bible and the gospel message when we promote tolerance at every sin and perverted lifestyle. He says that a large number of people who claim to be Christian have fallen prey to the idea that love equates with acceptance of anything and everything. The third Laodicean lie is political correctness. He quotes a syllogism by Dr. Al Mohler about how truth died. When that which was once celebrated is condemned, when that which was once condemned is now celebrated, and when those who refuse to celebrate are condemned. Truth is condemned, lies are celebrated, and those who refuse are condemned. Gary Fraser says that he does not care about being politically correct. Instead, he cares about truth. In a time when the values of our culture are inverted from biblical principles, we need to come back to Paul's teaching in the book of Romans. He wrote, "Let God be true and every human being a liar." I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we're back on Point of View, and I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey Youman as well as Kerby Anderson. And we have been talking a little bit about the race that happened in Florida yesterday, specifically the Florida governor's race, where you had the individual Andrew Gillum ended up winning in a very shocking twist, very much grassroots-oriented, had the backing of Bernie Sanders, even though he supported Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election. And is under investigation currently by is a part of the investigation, I should say, right now relative to what City Hall in Tallahassee. So there is that component that's looming over his campaign, but just a compelling figure, young, just very sharp, apparently, kind of similar to Beto O'Rourke from what we're understanding.
Right, wants to abolish ICE.
There goes the untrue labels, but nevertheless.
We're able to mention that. And he's the only non-millionaire in the race, and he was the most radical in the race because you had Buddy McKay, Bill McBride, Jim Davis, Alex Sink, and Charlie Crist, of course, had served before. So it's interesting. A millennial, not a millionaire, and a fairly radical, is that a fair statement in light of some of the things we just said? Individual, yes. And he wins, and the middle-of-the-road millionaires lose in the Democratic primary. So that says something.
And it's just fascinating because this rise, I think populism gets overused as a term, but there is a sense that it just is able to garner a significant amount of ground level support, and I think you saw that with Gillum. He campaigned very well, and now he's appealing to a very kind of the left segment of the left, which I think is just. I'm not saying that it's. I'm just saying that he's appealing very far left to that segment of the demographic, whereas you have a Ron DeSantis that is very much appealing to the Trump segment of the Republican Party.
Well, that's what the primaries are all about, right? So the primaries are all about getting elected by your base. And during the general, we know that it's a hard shift towards the median voter because truthfully, the median voter, that's who decides the race. Yeah. It's the undecideds out there. And so I think that's going to be what's fascinating to me about the outcome of this race is how comfortable or supportive are the median voters of the liberals becoming more and more really socialistic in their platforms. And I know Sanders has been Sanders was campaigning for him the entire last month in Florida, which I thought was interesting. But I think it'll tell a lot about actually just our median voters, your average voter who might not be hardline on one side or the other. What are they going to have to say about the left becoming further siloed?
And again, I just gave you the list of those who were kind of middle of the road individuals who lost in the governor's race. And of course, we just mentioned a minute ago, Gwen Graham. I mean, everybody would have thought that somebody that's a little more middle of the road would win. I recognize that in a primary, sometimes you go to the left or go to the right and then go to the middle. But when you're that far to the left, you would think that some individuals would say, well, maybe not. But I think after a while, seeing these sort of middle-of-the-road Democrats that have lost, maybe they're starting to say this is the case. But, boy, when back to something you, Chelsey, have said before, are we going to see more and more of these candidates that Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are endorsing? And has it been just kind of a philosophy for the Democrats that we're going to double down and we're going to actually take things that were outliers just 2 years ago and make those mainstream in the Democratic Party?
Well, if we look at history, and I say brief history, so history I remember, which would have been, the party that loses and maybe loses really painfully sometimes has an identity crisis afterwards. And so when President Obama won in 2008, I know that that's when the rise of the Tea Party really came in and the right really had, and still I think it's having an identity crisis. Who are we? What are our platforms? What do they look like? We had 17. I always laugh about this. It's still crazy to me, but we had 17 candidates running in our primary last election. That's a diverse platform party right there. Lots of diverse interest groups. You've got the establishment on the other side. So really, I think what we're seeing is the left is maybe the Democrats are having a similar type identity crisis to what the right had after Obama won.
I think we're just seeing like two. I don't know if it's an identity crisis or we're just seeing this emergent of two different camps that are on each side, right? So there's the Trump wing of the Republican Party, and I think that was what's epitomized by Ron DeSantis. And then you've got the I don't even know, the non-Trump. I don't want to call them never-Trumpers because I think that's just a false moniker. And it would be epitomized by Adam Putnam in this. Adam Putnam raised $39 million in this campaign. I don't know if he raised or spent $39 million, which I think is
a lot of money.
Very significant amount of money, one. But then you got to remember that Florida is just a very expensive market to run in. And so you've got $39 million that he raised. He had one of the, if you're looking for an individual to be a public servant, he had quite the experience being a state legislator, being a congressman, serving in the cabinet of the governor, just had the name recognition that comes with being in public service for a significant period of time, but yet he lost by 19 points. 19 points yesterday.
Good point, yeah.
And so that's a and he didn't get President Trump's endorsement. And then you have an individual that builds Lego walls with his child. And so, but then you've got on the Democratic side, though, I would call it's the Joe Biden party, the Joe Biden, E.J. Dionne. You've got that side of the left, but then you've also got just the socialists. The Democratic, you got to call it for what it is. They're calling themselves socialists right now. The abolish ICE, just a very radicalized side. And so really what we thought we were seeing is that socialist side was only good in one district in New York and then in some segments of California. But what it appears as though, and especially when you look at this Florida race, is I guess the Florida.
Here we go again.
There are a lot of factions.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of factions to take inventory of for your average voter or average individual. I mean, really, I think it's just it's fascinating, but it's also interesting just how diverse our country has become on these platforms and these issues.
Sure. Yeah, so that's why I'm always a little hesitant just to be able to say the right and the left now, because it really is. I mean, it
doesn't even mean anything.
Yeah, because it kind of it reminds me of the Selena Zito. She has that quote that says, "We're living in a day in which we have very weak parties but strong partisanship."
Yeah.
And so that's why I think when I say right, I don't know if I'm speaking about President Trump or if I'm speaking about former Governor Jeb Bush. Or left, am I talking about Bernie Sanders, or am I talking about Hillary Clinton, or am I talking about Beto O'Rourke, which are three very
Which
different.
brings us full circle to my theory where the median voter will decide this. I mean, that's who we need to talk to and speak to and really have debates with and get the ideas to, because they're not going to be as polarized and sticking to their guns. They're going to have questions and want to be working through these political theories and ideology and philosophy.
So
that's who the next 2 months are going to be about, no matter what race you're in.
This is where I'll push you, though, on that. You kind of said that, and I don't know if it was just a line that you wanted to use or you want to hold to it, is the idea that these are the type of individuals that are asking questions right now. And I would be interested to know if independent voters are actually asking questions right now, or they're apathetically frustrated by just the onslaught that's happening in the media right now.
Right.
And what Kerby often uses the illustration of just lobbing bombs back and forth to one another. They're just tired. They're just tired of it.
Right. You can, I guess that's fair to say, is that there's just a burnout rate.
Yeah.
That's very real and very tangible. But, I hope they pick a team, and I hope they show up and vote. And we're a representative democracy, so gonna pick a team.
And speaking of team, you mentioned Joe Biden just a minute ago. This tells you something about what could happen 2 years from now. And that is, the other day, Lathan Watch, Lathan, he was saying, Democrats are in a bad way when the voice of common sense is Joe Biden. But he's got so many great lines. But anyway, that's really interesting because all the other candidates for the presidency are very similar to Andrew Gillum in terms of abolish ICE, $15 an hour minimum wage, Medicare for all, and down the list. You know the list. We've talked about it so often. And the only person who's the outlier now is Joe Biden. And I think it's possible that after this election cycle, they may be saying, I'm just looking for somebody that's got some sanity here. I do not want to go the Bernie Sanders road. I don't want to go the route of all the other individuals, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris. You just go down all those individuals. There's one person that's not like the others, as we always like to say, and that may be the person that ends up winning the presidential nomination.
Yeah, we had one.
He's got to get through the primary, though.
Yeah.
Yes.
One that's not like the others. That sounds very similar to 2016 for the Republicans.
Who are you talking about?
That's exactly what we'll be talking about here after this. So when we come back from the break, I'm gonna broach the subject that I think we'll be walking through a minefield. So specifically, we'll be talking a little bit about evangelicals' relationship with President Trump and the dinner that happened on Monday night. Specifically, there's been some backlash against individuals that showed up to the evangelical state-like dinner to the White House, and so we'll be talking about the merits of should evangelical leaders be cozying up to the Trump White House. And so, but we'll also be taking some of your phone calls, and we'd love to hear from you. Should evangelical leaders be cozying up to the Trump White House? That number is 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212, and we will be back right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute, as well as Kerby Anderson. And we have been talking a little bit about what was happening in Florida at the governor's race specifically. But now we're going to transition a little bit and talk about what individuals are thinking about right now about the evangelical dinner that happened at the White House on Monday night. So reports indicate that there were upwards of 100 evangelical leaders that were at the White House for what's been called a state-like dinner, where Paula White, who's been a spiritual advisor as well as an individual that's been very influential in the White House, presented President Trump with a Bible, presented President Trump and First Lady Trump with a Bible, saying that history will record them as being kind of some of the great actions that they did. And it's caused quite an uproar, one might say, if you want to say that Twitter characterizes as representative of what actually happens in reality. But nevertheless, there's been one person that specifically has caused a little bit of consternation, is that one of those individuals was J.D. Greear, just recently elected as the SBC president. And what was so interesting is that J.D. Greear is a young pastor, not a young pastor, he's in his 40s now, out of North Carolina. And what was fascinating is that J.D. Greear largely said that he wanted to separate politics and religion specifically, as was kind of one of the big points that he was moving forward. Well, lo and behold, when First Lady Trump, Melania, released a picture on Twitter, an individual that we had on the show last week, Jonathan Merritt, who's got a new book out, pointed out J.D. Greer's presence. And Kerby, in a shocking twist, people are getting a little frustrated when we're mixing religion and politics.
Well, there you go. And we had Jonathan Merritt with us on last week. You and I had a chance. Well, you had interviewed him. I just kind of watched the two of you just go at it. But nevertheless, since that time, there have been some others just simply saying, why are we there? And this, I think, is going to be one of those questions that's going to be asked more and more as we find out more about Donald Trump. And as we almost every day are confronted by a Twitter statement that he makes, is passed, it's making at least some individuals a little bit uncomfortable. And for the old guy around the table, there was a time when people began to say, is it appropriate that Billy Graham spend so much time with Richard Nixon? This isn't at that level yet, but it's approaching it, because you're starting to have more and more people saying, look, okay, we appreciate the fact that, as Chelsey will point out in just a minute, these nominees, which are stellar nominees, outstanding individuals. We'll probably have Brett Kavanaugh sitting on the court. That's quite likely. We already have Neil Gorsuch, but also whether it's the appeals court or the federal court, just incredible nominees, which would not have existed if there was a different individual in the Oval Office. We look at some of the kind of individuals in the cabinet, Ben Carson, and we can go down that long list. Even the vice president, Mike Pence. These are all people you would not have seen if Hillary Clinton were the president. So on the one hand, you got to agree with a lot of things that have happened. You just a few minutes ago talked about all the positives that we have. But on the other hand, these Twitter comments, the behavior, the referring to the press as the enemy of the people, there are just some things that most of us around the table feel pretty uneasy about. We're not a never Trumper, but we're not a pro-Trumper. We're a sometimes Trumper, because some things don't really surface. But it seemed like a lot of people at that dinner Monday night were always Trumpers. And I think that's the question that people are starting to ask.
And so we're going to open up the phone lines to you. I've already seen a couple of calls that have come in. You can call in at 800-351-1212. What do you think about evangelicals largely cozying up to the Trump White House? We'd love to hear from you. 800-351-1212 or Facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Chelsey, I don't even have to say, do I even need to give you a question, or do you just want to just go?
I'll just talk. So, I actually have a lot of opinions about this. I know all of our listeners are like, what's new, Chelsey? Yeah. But, I think because of my line of work, I do religious liberty litigation, and I represent a lot of the cases I represent are sometimes they're like teachers or public officials who've been sued because they pray on the 50-yard line, for instance, after a football game, and they're a coach, and they're told you have to separate your religion from politics and your position in public life. And I just adamantly disagree with the idea that religion is not supposed to coincide with our politics. And that's because, as a woman, I'll use myself as an example. I'm allowed to vote based on my demographics as a woman, my educational standpoint, my background. Even, people vote based on their ethnicity and other backgrounds. You can have all these sociological reasons for why you vote the way you do. And for some reason, religion is always left off the list. And I think as a Christian, Christianity informs every decision I make and everything I do. It motivates my behavior, my work, my personal life. So I don't know why it can't help inform my politics. And when I have a president who has been very pro-life, very pro-Israel, protecting conscience rights for the HHS department is just doing an amazing and outstanding job protecting the rights of people to have accommodations in healthcare and all of the things that they're doing for religious adherence in our country and making sure that our First Amendment protections stand strong. I don't know why we wouldn't go have the ear of the president and use that as an opportunity to really talk about our issues. And I think it's okay to say, it doesn't mean it's a full endorsement of every statement he's ever made. That goes too far. That's not fair. They were invited to a dinner, and people attended, including my boss, Kelly Shackelford, was there. And I think it's amazing that the president opened the doors and hosted a dinner for evangelicals in our country who, whether people like it or not, are a large population in our country.
Okay, and that is Chelsey's point of view. And so we're going to open it up to other individuals' point of view. We'll take some phone calls right now. And so let's jump on over to Lee in Wyoming right now. Lee, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Hey, Lee, what is your point of view?
Well, I think that it's a good thing that the leaders, I would call it snuggling up to the president. It does say in 1 Timothy 1-15 that we are to make supplications and to pray for our leaders and support them. They are appointed there by God.
Sure.
In Romans 13:1, it also says to be subject to the governing body of the authorities that we're under. And we vote for those authorities, and God puts them there for us. We get the choice to vote for them, but in the long run, the Lord, he puts them there. He can make the elections go any way he wants to. He is the authority over everything, and we have to look at that. And I think that these leaders that are there, they are doing the right thing. They're doing what it says to do. I have no problems with that, and I think that our nation needs to be that way more. It was founded on biblical principles through the government, and they had no problems at all bringing in Christianity with the government when we first established our nation. And I think it needs to go back to that.
All right. Well, Lee, thank you so much for your phone call. We heard it loud and clear. And so let's just jump on over to Zolma right now. Zolma in Georgia. What are your thoughts?
As a Christian, I really don't like that leaders of the evangelical church are posing up to our president that much, because even though he's doing good things for religious liberty, which is good, he's so controversial, and he never stops talking in Twitter, and he do all these scandals that really cause in part of the evangelical people a roar, and people, get mad. And so I think that we should go there and we should pray for him, and we can do the prayer breakfast and things like that. But really to get right there, I find that it makes people, especially people that are from Hispanic countries, as I am, that are here, we see that like wrong, not just because the news are always saying bad things and only bad things. So not everyone has access to programs that inform you of the other side. So I would like for them to do the praying and help him out in every way, but not to be seen that way, like it looks like he's preferring the evangelical side versus the Catholic side or any other religious group. from other religions. So I at least if it was more broad, it would be less damaging. But it's just that he's so controversial that I would prefer for them to be there praying and be there being a good, giving good advice that they can do for the president, but not so much doing that interaction because people are talking, and usually, well, for the news, usually it's bad. So people just go by the news.
Yeah, well, Zolma, thank you so much. Zolma from Georgia, thank you so much for your phone call, but we've got to take a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we're going to continue to take your phone calls, take some questions about, do you think evangelicals kind of moving closer to the presidency, specifically going to the dinner, was a good thing? We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. If I were to tell you about worshipers describing themselves as underground, what comes to mind? Oppressive regimes and brutal dictators, maybe? Nazi Germany or first century Rome? Actually, that comes from our clients, Orthodox Jewish residents in Airmont, New York. And sadly, this is nothing new. The United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit explained in the 1995 case of LeBlanc Stenberg versus Fletcher that Airmont had been incorporated for the purpose of excluding Jewish citizens using zoning restrictions designed to prevent Jewish adherents from gathering for prayer within city limits. Going on 3 decades later, and at least 2 Department of Justice-led lawsuits, and the city of Airmont is still wielding its zoning laws to discriminate. Attorneys with First Liberty were in Airmont not long ago defending a local rabbi. He had spent over 2.5 years and about $20,000 in application costs trying to gain the approval to use his home for prayer meetings. Instead, the city rewarded him with a citation, carrying a penalty of up to $1,000 and a year in jail for the unlawful use of his home for prayer meetings. We managed to get those charges dropped, at least temporarily. No one should feel like they have to pray underground, hiding from the government or fearing punishment for what is supposed to be the free exercise of religion. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined by Chelsey Youman and Kerby Anderson, and we have been talking about the evangelical state-like dinner at the White House on Monday night that has caused quite an uproar on Twitter. No word on if that's actually reflective of reality, but we do know that there are quite a few phone calls that individuals that we pose the question to you all: is it a positive? Is it a negative that that evangelicals are getting this close to such a controversial president? And we're very interested to hear from you as well. And so we have been taking some phone calls, and so we're going to jump on over to Paulette in Texas right now. Paulette, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Paulette.
First of all, I want to answer your question. Yes, I think it's a good thing that the evangelicals were there. Who do we want to influence our president? Okay? That's one thought. The other thought is Mr. Obama, President Obama, had a state dinner for Islamic Muslim men and women to come in. And what was the uproar then? Certainly we and evangelicals might have been upset, but we knew that was his leaning, and that's what he wanted to do, and that's what he continued to do. But nobody tried to separate that influence from the government. So I'm just saying the shoe's on the other foot now, and I think people just need to back off because whatever president is in there is going to have people come that he likes and that he wants to know their opinion and what they're thinking and how they can help him. And it doesn't matter what president it is. Obama had the Muslims. President Trump has got the Christians. So, I mean, the rest of the country just needs to deal with it.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Can you join our roundtable?
Tell me how you really feel, Paulette.
I mean, remember, people. Remember what's already happened.
Yeah.
Who remembers? Well, who remembers what happened the last 8 years?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember that, and I was upset about it. But I didn't call Obama dirty, nasty words for having those Muslims in there. I was upset that they were in our White House. But where's the crowd that was against him doing that? That crowd is the ones that are fighting President Trump now.
Yeah.
And so I think it just is what it is.
Yeah, and just to be, we'll just be a little bit. So usually the president, regardless of whether it's President Trump or President Obama, like the what you're referring to is the meal that happened on June 22nd, the Ramadan iftar dinner, I believe it's pronounced. And so President Obama hosted that at the White House. I believe previous presidents have hosted similar type meals commemorating kind of the high holy days, one might say, at the White House. And so, and also just President Obama, former President Obama rather, did host Christians, but usually wasn't as explicitly as evangelical. I think has been one of the things that has caused individuals to be a little bit more hesitant, one might say. And then it kind of goes back, Kerby, to this idea of, is it more, there's one of the critiques of evangelicals historically, and this isn't just time, historically has been they have gone to great lengths to be able to get close to power. I think we saw that mistake with even Billy Graham. Billy Graham admitted kind of how close that he got with former President Nixon and repented of that before evangelical audiences or just the Christian audience at large, and that's been one of the critiques. I mean, that's documented from Tempting Fate with David Quo, that book, and then Michael Lindsay and Faith in the Halls of Power are articulating that evangelicals largely go in there with their issues, but if they can walk out with some commemorative coin or napkin or some sort, that usually satisfies their desires, and so they're kind of bent a little bit. And so there's always been that kind of knock against Christians, and it's not just limited to President Trump. I think it's pretty important for us to understand.
Well, and one of the things that we've talked about with William Martin, who was the biographer of Billy Graham, who's a professor at Rice, and I've spoken in his class before, and he's been on the program with us at least 2 different times, is Billy Graham was shocked one time to see some of the records in which some of the Nixon associates were saying, how can we use Billy Graham to advance our agenda? Then we've had Chuck Colson on this program, which Marlon Maddox used to do interviews. And Chuck Colson, when he was part of the Nixon administration, said, we can kind of use these Republican people. We can use some of these religious people to advance our agenda. I'm hoping now, because Mike Pence is one of us, if you want to call us evangelicals, that's not happening. But in the past, we know only so well that presidents oftentimes have used various leaders in some respects, just the incredible ability. You've walked in the White House before. I mean, there's just something, you sort of lose your bearings for a few minutes. I mean, you are in the seat of power. You're standing next to the President of the United States. You are in the Oval Office, or you're in the West Wing, or whatever it might be. It's pretty overwhelming. And so that's the part that I want to make sure that we have the right people there who are there not just to be overwhelmed by it all, But as we've talked about, there is this evangelical advisory group that I hope is speaking truth into the life of Donald Trump. And that's kind of the point that was being made earlier by Lee, that we really do need to encourage those individuals who are leaders to actually speak truth to power.
So one of the main critiques, and I know that there could be a variety of critiques about evangelicals associated with President Trump, and if I miss it, please call in at 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212. One of the main critiques that of evangelicals cozying up to the presidency is that it is you're guilty by association, right? Like you're being
okay. This is helping. I'm like, well, I don't understand.
So, like his idea of why would you be associated with an individual who they claim is a bigot, who they claim is a racist, who has a history of indiscretions relative to what he's done with women, as well as business, financial dealings, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's been one of the bigger critiques that evangelicals have said, you don't go. Well, then you've got the side that says, well, if we don't go, then our voice isn't going to be heard. And
right.
I'll acknowledge, I've been to the White House, and I will say that they are very open and very much wanting to listen to hear what our issues are, and that those aren't just religious liberty issues. Yes, that's primarily important. I was in a meeting where they were talking about Israel. I was at a meeting when they were talking about prison reform. This is a White House that very much cares about what evangelicals have to say, and so they have been very open with trying to create conduits whereby evangelicals can speak into the White House and kind of share some of those things. Simeon Rodriguez was another individual that I saw at the White House. Mm-hmm. Simeon Rodriguez leads the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Coalition, and so there's the Hispanic constituency, but Simeon Rodriguez, I mean, he'll tell you he's been one of the loudest proponents of prison reform and criminal justice reform right now. And he has just been so loud on that, wanting to speak out towards that. And one of the kind of taglines that Sammy uses is the idea that he's not for the donkey, he's not for the elephant, he's for the lamb. And so he's wanting, he is a big Nabisco fan.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, one of the I feel frustration when I hear about all these criticisms because first and foremost, I mean, things like Roe versus Wade happened on our watch and will never be overturned by our legislature because Christians sit at home, mm-hmm. right? So these policies sometimes have very real impacts on people's lives. I mean, even children's lives directly. So beyond the pro-life issue, there are so many issues that I think the church is called to do its job and not to rely on the government to do its job. So don't hear me making that argument. But at the end of the day, if the opportunity is before us, if Chuck Schumer invited evangelicals to a dinner, I would hope they would go and try to sway Chuck Schumer. And I would hope that they would use the avenues available to us in our society to petition our government for morality and for biblical views and for biblical policies or policies rooted in ideas and faith.
And Simeon Rodriguez, again, has done that. He hasn't just spoken out. He was very much spoken out against DACA and some of the things that happened there, even to the extent that he was a part of a press conference with Nancy Pelosi. And so that's another individual that, yes, he was at the Trump White House, but yes, he was also standing beside Nancy Pelosi. We've got to take a break, but we'll be back right after this.
Yep.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I've recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable on this August 29th, 2018 day by Chelsey, Youman, as well as Kerby Anderson, Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. And so we have been talking a little bit over the first 2 hours about everything. Specifically, we were talking about the Ted Cruz, Beto O'Rourke race that's happening here in Texas during the first hour, and then we talked a little bit during the second hour about kind of some of the race that happened in the governor's race in Florida. Specifically talking a little bit about the implications for that coming into November and the nationalized sense of it when you're talking about kind of a state level race and what that will look like. But really what seemed to be individuals wanting to talk about was the evangelical state-like dinner on Monday night at the White House. And so the White House hosted evangelical leaders, upwards of 120 evangelical leaders that were at the White House for a dinner, a state-like dinner is what it's being termed as right now. And the question was raised whether that was a positive thing or it was a negative thing. Individuals were, based on my characterization, it seemed as though kind of the biggest critique about that is that evangelicals are cozying up a little too closely to a very controversial president due to some of his indiscretions in the past and rhetoric in the all too recent present, as well as what's causing some individuals discomfort towards that. And then other individuals, a large part of the argument has been, why not? If it's the people's house and evangelicals are the people of the U.S., why would they not take advantage of an invitation in order to be able to advance their policy concerns and beliefs? And so we have been opening up the phone lines to you to be able to call in, and you can do that at 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212. And then we're also on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Again, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And Shelley, you are welcome. Thank you so much for your comment as well. And so we're going to continue going to the phone lines as well. And so let's jump on over to Arizona, shall we? And so in Arizona, we have Charmaine. Is that Charmaine? Is that you?
Yeah, that's me, Charmaine.
That's so very nice. So what is your point of view?
Well, I just want to say I appreciate the fact that the evangelical leaders were invited to the White House.
Mm-hmm.
This is my first time calling in, so I'm a little nervous. But anyways, I feel that our president isn't polished with a lot of the things that he does, tweets. But that is why the people voted for him, in my opinion, especially the conservatives. I think they were past the point of all these presidents that we've had that have been, politicians, and I don't believe that he is a politician necessarily. People voted a businessman that would care about their country, and Pence to back him up, I believe, is just a blessing. But I think the people voted loud and clear that conservatives would not be oppressed and stifled, that they didn't want to be oppressed and stifled because of their faith. Past President Obama, you had brought up, he canceled the National Day of Prayer at the White House, and then had a Muslim celebration. And I didn't see any uproaring. I know my heart turned. I appreciate that we have a leader that is not afraid of opposition, and he's not going to be bullied. I appreciate that. We haven't had that in a long time. Yeah, like I said, he's rough around the edges, doesn't speak that great, but I know his heart is right, and I know our vice president's heart is right, and that is why our military, I believe that our military is energized right now. I work co-workers with military men that are still in the force, in the military, and they are energized. They appreciate our leadership. They appreciate the fact that he's a true leader that is a leader finally, and then that we have a leader, and I kind of feel like he is like a strong father figure in a way. He's not going to back down just because what people say. He's going to look after the United States first and others second. Mm-hmm. And I believe he still has kindness. And yeah, like I said, his words are rough. I know they're rough on the edges and stuff in there. But if evangelical Christians are not going to stand behind this president, then we can't complain when the next president that opposes people of faith in general, or conservatives, like we've had oppression. And it's I don't want to take up too much time, but I do want to leave with a little note that if you beat a dog long enough, don't expect him to protect you. I want to say thank you guys for everything you do, and I'll end it. And I hope you are blessed, and I appreciate our leadership today and all of the evangelicals that have stood up and got on board to be leaders in this country. And thank you.
Thank you so much. She makes an interesting point that individuals are bringing up, is that largely President Trump is rough around the edges, and is not willing to back down from a fight. And so many are saying that evangelicals of the Clinton years said that character matters, and when they realized that character doesn't really matter when it came to the populace, then we're willing to kind of move this way.
I'm just going to put this out there, and it's probably make a lot of people mad, but I'm hearing a lot of snobbery. I mean, really, like evangelical snobbery to say like we're above meeting with someone even though they have character flaws. Like I would hope as a Christian that I would be willing to meet with almost anyone to talk about the gospel and to talk about what's important to me, and like to advocate for my beliefs with anyone. I don't care who it is who invites me, right? And so for me, that's what I'm thinking. I can't think of a biblical reference where I think most of the kings in the Bible, even if they weren't, God's chosen king, they still had a prophet that God sent to them to give God's message. Yeah. I mean, really, I'm not saying that he's anything about Trump, comparing and equating him to biblical kings or anything like that, because we've get a lot of that on this show. But what I'm saying is you can go into fields that are not Christian, that are overtly and maybe even opposed to our Christian beliefs, and still speak the gospel and still speak truth. And I think that's admirable.
Yeah, I think the other biblical argument that would be made, you can go to 1 Corinthians 5, where
I knew you were going to say that one.
where you don't associate with such individuals, but largely that's individuals that are very licentiousness would probably be the word, and that are overtly claiming to be Christian. And so there's the idea that
that's more associated. When I think of that, I think of befriending and living life with, and just like closer than what this is, which was showing up and talking about our issues.
Mm-hmm. Charmaine said something just in passing, and that is, this is a man that does not back down, and in light of an enormous amount. Now, I grant he brings some of it on himself, but the amount of abuse that this president has been through already is nothing like anything that has ever happened before. So if there's ever been a reason to pray for the president of the United States, can you imagine what it's like every day? I mean, there have been some times when I've been called homophobic, anti-Semitic, all of which were not true, but it doesn't make any difference. After a while, especially when you see it in the press, if you've ever done that, and I have seen things said about you that you just know aren't true, he sees that every single day. And it is amazing that he has stayed on message. And so, if anything, I would just hope it would challenge all of us to pray for our president.
And we're going to have to take a break. But when we come back, we'll continue talking about whether evangelicals should be getting as close as they are with President Trump. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Many people in our world accept certain lies uncritically. That is the argument in one of the chapters in the book Deceivers. Dr. Gary Frazier was on the Point of View radio program recently to talk about his chapter dealing with Laodicean lies. The church in Laodicea is mentioned in the 3rd chapter of the book of Revelation. It was a church that was lukewarm, neither hot nor cold. In many ways, this describes our 21st century world. The first Laodicean lie is the belief that you don't need God. The message of Laodicea was that God was irrelevant. He explains that it is the deception to think that the church can possibly operate in the flesh as opposed to the Spirit of God. The second Laodicean lie is the promotion of unconditional love and acceptance. Certainly we should love sinners, but we compromise the Bible and the gospel message when we promote tolerance at every sin and perverted lifestyle. He says that a large number of people who claim to be Christian have fallen prey to the idea that love equates with acceptance of anything and everything. The third Laodicean lie is political correctness. He quotes a syllogism by Dr. Al Mohler about how truth died. When that which was once celebrated is condemned, when that which was once condemned is now celebrated, and when those who refuse to celebrate are condemned. Truth is condemned, lies are celebrated, and those who refuse are condemned. Gary Frazier says that he does not care about being politically correct. Instead, he cares about truth. In a time when the values of our culture are inverted from biblical principles, we need to come back to Paul's teaching in the book of Romans. He wrote, "Let God be true and every human being a liar." I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined in studio by Chelsey, Youman, and Kerby Anderson. And we have been talking about President Trump's meeting, his dinner that he had at the White House early in the week on Monday, specifically with evangelical leaders, anywhere from 100 to 120 evangelical leaders gathered. And we posed the question to listeners as to whether that was a positive or a negative. Should evangelicals be cozying up, getting close to this administration? Some would say no, guilty by association, and by guilty, you mean guilty in the media's eyes that have records indicate that 90% of news coverage is negative towards President Trump. Or is this a positive thing? That this is the people's house. These individuals represent a constituency, and just like any other individual or entity or group, they should be giving voice to some of the issues that they care about. And so we have been opening up the phone lines. So 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And then we've also are on Facebook, facebook.com/Point of View Radio. And we are taking some of your questions as well as your comments as well on facebook.com. So let's go ahead and jump on over to California, shall we? We've got Kathy in California right now. Kathy, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Kathy.
My opinion is we had the Black Robe Brigade, which were the pastoral, who took off their robes and went and fought the Revolutionary War. And then we won that in Washington. They wanted to make him a king, but he said, no, we didn't fight this war for me to become a king. My sovereignty doesn't come from man. It comes from God. And since the 60s, we've been pushed out of the town square as being hypocritical, being sexually provincial, and all of these things. And yet, if you read if you say the Pledge of Allegiance, and I looked up every one of the words in a Webster Collegiate Dictionary, we actually pledge that flag and our nation back to God because we are free slaves and bondsmen. And we are one, but yet we're many because we have various different states. But we're one, yet we're a nation, and we're under God. And as a Christian nation, we are the church. If we believe in the Constitution and believe in the flag and the rampart, whenever the flag was yet, standing, God didn't just make that, make this nation for us to just throw it away and say that those things are not valid, because those are very valid.
Yeah, Kathy.
That's how American became America.
You
it wasn't from the sovereignty of man. It was from the sovereignty of God.
Yeah, you bring up a really great point, Kathy, in the sense that, especially for Christians, I guess the delineation would be, are we a nation of Christians or are we a Christian nation? And I think there's a sense that Christians very much played a part in the founding of our country. But one of the interesting things is we had the freedom of religion that was a part of that. And so Christians and our founders knew that Christians could be a very good asset. Religious individuals could be a good asset in a limited government system that's a government for the people, by the people, of the people. And that religious people are virtuous people. Virtue is inculcated in religion. And you want to have virtuous people that are a part of this, so that they're helpful, because when you have religious people that are practicing their beliefs, you don't have to have as many police officers. You don't have to have as many children's homes. You don't have to have some of these services that we have the government to provide right now, because you have Christians that are adhering to James 1:27. Pure and undefiled religion is this: to take care of the orphans and the widows in their distress and remain unstained by the world. That you don't have to have as many police officers, because you're saying that we're to keep we're to be above reproach, right? And so you bring up really great points, Kathy. So thank you so much for that. And we're going to jump on over to Mary, also in California. Mary, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Mary, what's your point of view?
Okay, thank you for having me on the air. I just happened to turn my radio on, and you guys were on. I was looking for a Christian. I'm always looking for a Christian station. Anyway, but it really caught my attention, and then I just had to sit and listen. And I get really emotional when we talk about our president because of all that he's doing for us, and it really breaks my heart that us Christians, we should bind together. We should be standing behind him 100% and stop talking about what he's saying and what he didn't say and that he's a Christian, he's not a Christian. That's not for us to know. Just like all of us, we've all come short of the glory of God. We're not perfect, but we need to stand together and build him up. Stop the division between our churches and all that. But if we really are a nation that under God, I really believe that he has an anointing on his life. The Lord put him there, and we need to stand behind him. We have to stop all the petty stuff and start going for truth, because the truth is what's going to set us free. And I see him going through so much persecution, but they did that to Jesus too, and it just breaks my heart. And especially Christians, that call themselves Christians, that'll come and complain about, he shouldn't do this, and how do we know he's, all of that just really, really hurts me. And I know that it hurts the Lord because he put him there, and all he wants to do is the right thing, and he's really proven over and over how good he is. When Obama stood up there and said that we were not a nation under God, it just broke my heart. I couldn't believe this man saying that, because that's where we stand. I have brothers that were Army. I have 3 brothers that went in Army. One was Air Force, the other one was a Marine. My 2 sons went one Army and one Air Force. We have fought for this country and for this nation, and we have to stand together. All I say is, maybe we don't agree on everything, But let's stand behind our president 100%, because I think that with that, I really believe our nation will come back to what it used to be, or what God wants it to be, where we can get along again and where there's not so much crime and all the other stuff that we've seen that was so bad in our country. So I just thank God for our president. I really believe that there is an anointing on his life. And no matter what people say and do, God is still going to carry him. I see that. And I say let's pray for him, and pray for him every day, and for the cabinet and everything that concerns them up there, that the truth would set us free.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Mary. You have reminded our listeners very much so of the admonition from 1 Timothy 2 to pray for those that are in authority over us. And then I'm always one of the things that I always want to pray for not only is wisdom, but like you alluded to at the very end of your comments, to have individuals that are surrounding that person. Because we know there's great success and prosperity that comes with wise counsel as well. And so wanting to surround that person with counsel. And so we're going to jump and take one more phone call. We've got Ermine in Texas. Are you there?
Hi.
Hey, what is your point of view? Am I pronouncing your name right, Ermine?
It's Ermin.
Oh, I'm so off. I apologize.
No, I am so used to that. It's fine. Perfectly fine with that. I just want to say very enthusiastic. I truly, truly like President Trump so much. I like him so much. I really liked Ben Carson, Ted Cruz, but I voted for President Trump. I am so proud of him. I got involved politically back in 1988 or 1990 for the unborn. And I just think when you have a president that listens to the evangelical side and Christians, and you see what he's doing and who he's appointed, it's not about his personal life. He is doing the job, and I've been alongside working with elections. I've worked alongside Democrats because I had to, and I've worked with Republicans. And we've had Republicans who are statesmen, but this wonderful president, he's gone in, and he's doing the job that a president should do. He is doing all that a president is required to do. And I just almost want to, when I look at that question, I'm like, are you kidding me? Should evangelicals go to a dinner with the president? Well, are you thinking? Absolutely, yes. And, you think of Daniel, and he was with, King Darius, and he was so grieved that Daniel being thrown in the lions. And think of Joseph. He was with Pharaoh. And if you bring it up to the New Testament, Paul was with King Agrippa. So I'm like, should evangelicals go to a president that really cares? And when I think of the people who's been elected, they get in there, and I have experienced this. You get them elected, you work for them, you walk, you make phone calls, they get elected, and they turn on you. Mm-hmm. And they may not do bad things, but they don't do anything. I think of our Republican House last year with the Speaker of the House and the chairman that did not support the bathroom bill, making calls down there. And so I really appreciate this president. One more thing I'll share with you is really, really neat, and I would encourage all your listeners to do this. Even on notebook paper, it would mean a lot, is to write President Trump and say thank you for everything you've done. I've received 2 personal replies back, and that has really meant a lot.
Take a break, but we'll be back right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, and we have been talking about President Trump and specifically evangelicals and the relationship between the two. Obviously, it rose to national attention, I guess you could say, on Monday night when the Trump White House hosted a gathering together, a dinner, what some are calling a state-like dinner, and there is much that is being made right now about that dinner. And we posed the question to you all: is this a positive thing or is this a negative thing? And what I'm really interested in is we've heard a lot of positive comments, but we haven't heard anybody that spoke a word of caution or slow down. And I'd be interested to hear if there is anybody in particular out there that would want to give voice to that side of the opinion, or am I just going to have to pretend like I'm on that side of the opinion and make that, which Chelsey glaringly is like, bring it on. Bring it on. But nevertheless, you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can hop on over to Facebook, facebook.com/Point of View Radio, and leave a question or comment on air or online, and then we'll share it over the air as well. And I think one, Chelsey, that I think you needed to hear. So John on Facebook writes, millennials shouldn't throw too many stones at Trump because it might be hard to find an unblemished millennial in the future for president unless Chelsea runs.
Ooh, I like this. You should do more comments more often.
He also said, Nick, but we know I have Snapchat.
Because I'm not on Twitter, because I don't understand it.
I know. But nevertheless, we're going to continue taking some of your phone calls as well. So again, that number is 800-351-1212. And so we have Dave right now. Dave, are you there?
Yeah, I'm on.
Hey, Dave, what's your point of view?
Well, I think it's a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, I think he's got license to do it. In the preamble, we the people ends with a nation under God, and that, to me, that's that puts God above the nation. And I would hate to have to stand in front of them and use some of the abortion issues and things like this for my defense. You know,
mm-hmm.
I think he had some pretty smart women on here. The last three I heard were just wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I've got.
Well, Dave, thank you so much for that. I appreciate your comment. Let's jump on over to Texas right now. We have Aurora here in Texas. Are you there?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Yes, ma'am. What is your point of view?
Well, thank you for allowing me this time to say something. I just wanted to say that we need to be very careful how we look at this thing. It's not a matter of it being according to what other people say. It matters what God says, and whether it's negative or positive, it doesn't really matter. What does God say in His Word? And also, we don't base it by what Obama did or didn't do. We're supposed to base ourselves on what the Word of God says. There have been many things that this president has done that have not been in accordance to God's Word, and that the so-called Christians have not stood up. Now, this country has been in moral decay since the 70s when the abortion took place, and also the prayer taken out of school and all of that. So we're just seeing the judgment of God because of what we have done. We have cast His word aside and not done what He has asked us to do. He says, to be careful. Not to hate the stranger, and not to separate families and all of that, which is what we're doing. And yet the evangelicals are not speaking up just because they want a better judge. We all want good judges, Christian judges, but because of what has happened, God has allowed all these things to go on. And so we have to be very careful that we don't demand, that we don't trust in a man. In the old days, during King Cyrus and all of that, they didn't have a vote. We have a vote now. And we could have chosen from many other good candidates, but people chose to vote for a man just because of, different reasons, and that he was going to make it and everything else. But what we have done is that we limited God, and God is very angry very upset when we limit His power and His might. We said, He can do it because He's a billionaire, because He can stand this and that. I've seen Him fall on things that are really and not good. And so we need to stop admiring that man that has done so many things. And even the evangelicals have taken pictures behind or in front of posters that have not been good. And so we wonder about the moral decay. Well, we're not getting a very good example or very good role model from the White House. So we have to look at the overall picture and what is God saying? What is God saying to his people, to those that have been bought by the blood of Jesus and are truly born again? So we have to stop playing these games and really be serious with what the Lord is saying, and stop just saying okay because they're getting a good judge. What does God say? Cursed is the man that trusted in the arm of flesh, and blessed is the man that trusted in God. And no matter what we're going through, as the Word of God says in Jeremiah, we're going to prosper. And those people that stood up in Daniel and all those people, they lived their faith. They went through hardships and everything else. The problem is that we're instead of depending on God to protect us and to help us and to live out our faith, we're depending on a man that is not living out his faith, and a lot of other pastors that are not living out their faith, and we want them to protect us instead of God is on our side. God, we're going to be protected by the Lord and his word and his mercy and his grace. And so I think we're just looking at it at the wrong way. Yes, we're supposed to pray for our leaders. We're just supposed to submit to them. But when they do wrong, we're supposed to stand up, just the way that Daniel and the 3 Hebrew children did. How many people, true Christians, are willing to do that, no matter who's in the White House? And when they did that, the whole nation changed. How many times have we heard of people standing up and whole communities and nations changing because of they lived out their faith? And we just need to stop playing games and playing church. Oh, is this right? No, we do what we do because God said it. What come may, no matter what the circumstances or what the repercussions or what we go through. And so that's what I just wanted to say. We need to stop playing games and really focus on God and living out our faith. And all these people that, we don't want these people to come in, I understand that. But at the same time, where are we preaching the word of God, going over there and telling them about the Lord Jesus Christ? Things are not going to change until we do that. It's not going to change by a certain president that has really done a lot more damage to the U.S. than any other president. Where is the outrage of true Christian believers? Where are they? Now it seems like people that don't even know the Lord are trying to be him a little bit more moral than we do. And then they're saying, what has happened is that the Christian church has lost their testimony. And now whenever we're going to say something else, or we're going to go with other people because they're not doing right, whatever, they're always going to say, well, you all supported Trump. Now, not that I support Trump and I didn't vote for him because there were so many other people that were better than this man. And what happened is that we limited God, and that's what we need to stop doing. Stop limiting God, start living for him, and preaching the word of God wherever you are.
Yeah, and you started on this phone call. That's should we pass the plate right now? My goodness, thank you so much, Aurora. The great passion, and like you said, we want to be true testaments and witness. And I think that's always one of the interesting things, Chelsey, that I hear. We want to liken there's been individuals that have likened President Trump to King David with some of his moral indiscretions in the past. But even when King David had some of those moral indiscretions, he had a prophet, Nathan, that was willing to stand up and to speak out against some of those things. It wasn't because Nathan was against him. It was because Nathan was for him, but he knew that being for you means wanting to live a life of repentance, I guess you would say, with Martin Luther.
And what I'm hearing is, I think if evangelicals were more honest about the discretions and more willing to say openly, like, this is not in line with our biblical beliefs, our values, or our moral compasses, or spiritual compasses, I should really say. But, if evangelicals were more willing to be honest about that, then maybe going to the dinner wouldn't seem like such an endorsement, because people would understand more that there's not a hypocrisy there. But I would argue that attending the dinner and talking to anyone who represents us about their faith or beliefs is an effort to share the gospel. And I think it's that when Christians sit at home, things like the the pro-choice movement expand, divorce reform expands. I think there's a lot of arguments for Christians just to sit down and sit at home. And to me, that really does shape our society and really changes in a sad way. It erodes a lot of the moral fabric of our society for Christians to sit at home. And so I'll just never advocate for that. I'll always be an advocate for anyone of any faith standing by their faith and doing that to their representatives. We're a faction just like any other faction that's out there.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the interesting things is there's just that we're living in a world in which we can't even speak a word of disagreement towards someone without being seen. It's almost like we're living in the false dichotomy of you either like smooth peanut butter or you are a Nazi. Like, no, I think you can like chunky peanut butter.
I bet you're
and
gonna
not
get some
be
callers
a Nazi.
over this one.
Yeah, I know. There's some people that are broken and that like chunky peanut butter. But nevertheless, we're gonna have to take a phone call. We're gonna have to take a break. But when we come back from the break, we'll continue talking about this. Definitely very interesting. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. If I were to tell you about worshipers describing themselves as underground, what comes to mind? Oppressive regimes and brutal dictators, maybe? Nazi Germany or first century Rome? Actually, that comes from our clients, Orthodox Jewish residents in Airmont, New York. And sadly, this is nothing new. The United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit explained in the 1995 case of LeBlanc Stenberg versus Fletcher that Airmont had been incorporated for the purpose of excluding Jewish citizens using zoning restrictions designed to prevent Jewish adherents from gathering for prayer within city limits. Going on 3 decades later and at least 2 Department of Justice-led lawsuits, and the city of Airmont is still wielding its zoning laws to discriminate. Attorneys with First Liberty were in Airmont not long ago defending a local rabbi. He had spent over 2.5 years and about $20,000 in application costs trying to gain the approval to use his home for prayer meetings. Instead, the city rewarded him with a citation, carrying a penalty of up to $1,000 and a year in jail for the unlawful use of his home for prayer meetings. We managed to get those charges dropped, at least temporarily. No one should feel like they have to pray underground, hiding from the government or fearing punishment for what is supposed to be the free exercise of religion. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, the proponent of smooth peanut butter. Just in case our people that are viewing us right now on Facebook.com, if you've heard of Facebook, over 2 billion people, you can see I'm holding this jar of beautiful, delicious, godly, smooth peanut butter. And this indicates 2 things. 1, you can trust my character. And 2, there's a phenomenal staff here at Point of View that is just exceedingly gracious, not only to put up with me, but also willing to gift me smooth peanut butter, which I'm always in desperate need of. Chelsey, are you all right?
7 grams of protein. You can't go wrong.
Yeah,
Look at
what can I
that.
say?
Yeah.
It's this 15-inch neck. You got to be able to see this. But nevertheless, we have been talking about President Trump and specifically his relationship with evangelicals. Some are voicing their discontent and dissatisfaction that President Trump and evangelicals would meet with him at the White House on Monday at the dinner. Others have been showing and voicing their support of this, that evangelicals, just like any other constituency, are never going to agree completely with any president. And they, as a part of this great United States of America, are lifting up their voice in order that they might be able to have their policies and their positions advanced and moved forward, but more specifically at this instance, heard as well. And so we've been taking some of your phone calls, and we just got off the phone with Aurora from Texas that was showing some disconcern. And then we're also going to be taking other phone calls as well. And so you can call in at 800-351-1212. And we're going to keep on the phones to the promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey. Rocky Top, you'll always be home sweet home to me. We have John on the line. John, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, John.
My biggest concerns are the people are idolizing the president. The Bible warns not to be unequally yoked. Mr. Trump, I best would say, has been a seducer through his life. And the things I'm afraid that by embracing him too tightly, we will be simply a stench in the eyes of most of the citizens of our country and will hurt us long term. I just finished reading the book Fire and Fury. Mr. Trump seems to have a problem with telling the truth many times. The Bible says the devil is the father of lies. One of God's attributes is truth, and God is also a God of love. And Mr. Trump, despite his profession of faith, tends to do things that are arbitrary, capricious, and hurtful to many people in this country.
Yeah, John, I think you bring up some really great points. And Chelsey, this kind of goes to what we were just talking to. It seems as though individuals that are supportive of President Trump, that are of the evangelical persuasion, have not in the past shown an ability to speak a negative word about him. That largely they have been pretty significant cheerleaders in public, but then I guess the qualification would be that they haven't said anything in private to be able to kind of call out some of this behavior that seems very unbecoming.
Right.
For
I mean,
a Christian
we're painting with really broad brushstrokes, though, because I mean, even in my church on Sunday morning, you'll have the pastor say, you know, we can't endorse some of the things he's saying and we can't back some of the things he's saying, but that's different than saying we support these policies that are, you know, going to be conservative, good, moral policies. And so, you know, I just don't think it's fair to paint that broad brushstrokes, but I do think the overall sentiment is if evangelical leaders were more willing, perhaps, to be more open with the media or vocal about, you know, we're not supportive of Stormy Daniels scandals or things of that nature, you know, that maybe it would be seen less as a credibility hit to be able to go to the White House. So that's more my point, is I think if evangelicals were more open, perhaps, then maybe this wouldn't be such a credibility question. But again, if Chuck Schumer invited, or Nancy Pelosi or Obama invited all of these evangelical leaders to a state dinner, I don't think we'd be having this conversation and saying, well, is there credibility in question for going to this dinner? It would be seen as an opportunity to get the ear of our leaders, which is what representative democracy is about, you know? So that's where I stand on the issue.
Yeah. And so, you know, go ahead, John.
One other point, the office of president is to execute or defend the laws that are passed by Congress and signed by the president. If the president comes off as somebody being above the law or someone who views the law as not to be followed, it's not a good example for the nation, and it's a bad reflection on us.
Which, I mean, I think you've got a really great point, and I think that's why many people, to a certain extent, people are, I would argue that people are just tired of the Mueller investigation that's going on right now. But even though there might be a tiredness to it, I think it's so far it's yielding indictments right now. People are being shown guilt, like Russian agents to Paul Manafort, to, Michael Cohen's even pled guilty to 8 particular counts. And so I think that's another reason why it's important for us to utilize the system that we have in place, specifically the court of law, to be able to figure out what happened, to allow Mueller to do what Mueller can do, and then allow the president to do what he does, which is the executive branch, is to enforce the laws. And I think that's going to be increasingly important. John, thank you so much. One more question, John, for you. Where are you from? Where are you in?
I live in Smyrna, Tennessee.
Oh, Smyrna. Okay, very neat. I was born in Knoxville and lived in Clinton for a long time. So thanks so much, John, for your phone call.
You're welcome. Bye.
Okay. Yeah, and again, I think that's an increasingly important point. But you know what's really fascinating, though, which I just now thought of, that there really hasn't been a president. Like, so, for example, we didn't expect George W. Bush to be, so we don't expect every president to represent every constituency in particular. So George Bush was he gave the auto bailout, for example. But he wasn't in auto, right? Like, so there wasn't that cozy relationship. It goes back to your point. It seems as though evangelicals, they're a special category that we just have to assume that, especially from other audiences, that in order for evangelicals to associate with an elected official, that person has to be an evangelical, right? Am I making sense right now? It just seems very different.
I would call it a heightened sensitivity, if not paranoia, honestly. And this is because I deal with atheist organizations constantly who are, yelling separation of church of state. You can't so much as pray outside a courthouse without getting a letter from FFRF. So I see a lot of paranoia and almost conspiracy theories anytime Christians are involved. And it's unfortunate because being a Christian doesn't make you a second-rate citizen, and anyone else would be, I think, hopeful that they could meet with the president and get his ear and speak about issues that they're passionate and care about. And this should be no different. Mm-hmm. I think there should be a neutrality there.
Yeah, it's an interesting world that we're living in, Kerby.
Well, and again, that's one of the questions that Chelsey just raised. If indeed you had Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi invited these evangelicals, would they be criticized? I think they would, because we still have this world that simply says when you show up, you're endorsing that. And I like to set that aside. I can go to certain meetings and listen to them and disagree with them. And just because I'm sitting in that meeting doesn't mean that I agree with them. So that's the first issue. But there's another lesson that a couple of our callers are really talking about. It's the old Samuel Johnson quote, how small of all that human hearts endure, that which laws or kings can cause or cure. The point is that government can only do so much. Mm-hmm. And whether we're expecting too much out of Donald Trump, too much out of our government, it's just ridiculous. We shouldn't idolize them. We might always want to keep a little bit of a distance between us and the gospel anyway. So I think there's some wisdom in that as well. But we're coming up to a midterm election, and if you don't like some of the people you have in power right now, I think there's a solution. That is to go out there and make sure you're registered to vote, people that you know are registered to vote. And back to Chelsey and my favorite line, turn out to vote and vote intelligently, because that's going to make the difference as to whether or not some of these things we're talking about right now advance, or whether they're going to be inhibited because of who is elected to the Senate and to the House. Donald Trump's not on the ballot, but his policies are on the ballot, aren't they?
It will be a very interesting race, and so that's coming up within 3 months, and so it's going to be here right before you know it. And so we're going to have to end the show for today. So Chelsey, thank you so much for joining us today. Kerby, thank you so much for giving up your seat, and we will be back here tomorrow. But you can tune in. You can find more information about Point of View at pointofview.net, or be sure to go to facebook.com/pointofviewradio in order to find out more information on Point of View. Be sure to like us and follow along, and I will see you back here tomorrow. Bye.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.